The audience expects a straightforward interview, quiet reflections, and perhaps a story or two about a movie in the works when Keanu Reeves takes the stage late at night. But something is off right away. The host tries to steer the evening toward laughter. But Keanu isn't following the script. Instead, he's distantly focused. Then his eyes lock onto something unexpected. A small golden rosary placed silently on the table in front of him. At that point, the atmosphere changes, the questions change, and the answers do as well. By the time the last words are spoken, the audience isn't applauding. Instead, they are watching Keanu Reeves break years of silence on live TV following a secret Vatican encounter. What he shares could completely alter our understanding of faith, power, and prophecy. Oh, and before we go any further, tell us what you love most about Keanu Reeves in the comments section. A casual segment turns into something completely different. On any other evening, this would have been just another late-night talk show with casual jokes about celebrities, Hollywood gossip, and behind-the-scenes laughter. But tonight felt different, and not just because the world was still processing the death of Pope Francis. The host's charming smile and polished voice projected his voice to the room, "Ladies and gentlemen," and Keanu Reeves received thunderous applause from a few audience members. The studio lights flickered briefly before settling, and the LED glow from the cameras reflected on the excited faces of the audience, who were buzzing with anticipation for tonight's special guest. He entered with slow, silent steps, dressed in a black suit without a tie, his hair slightly longer than usual, and his courteous but distant expression. Members stood up. Some discreetly raised their phones to record, even though it was against studio policy. The host extended a hand, and Keanu gently shook it. They sat across from each other as expected on the table between them, with a glass of water, a few cords, and oddly, a small golden rosary resting on a cushion of deep blue velvet. Keanu, the host, started to keep the mood light. The audience noticed the change and gradually quieted down, asking, "Everything okay?" The host asked with a forced laugh, "You're even more zen than usual tonight?" Keanu took a deep breath and reached out, lightly touching the rosary with his fingertips. "You still look immortal. What's your secret holy water?" Keanu said nothing, but he did give a faint smile. His eyes briefly strayed as though he were delving into a long-forgotten memory. "He told me something that night in Rome," he finally said, his voice low and calm, almost as if he was speaking to himself about something no one had ever heard. The host leaned forward, a little intrigued, and the audience fell silent. But perhaps today I must tell it. The studio froze for a moment, and nobody knew if this was a staged moment or a clever promotional twist for a movie. But Keanu wasn't acting. There was no sign of performance in his face. The audience remained silent as the host exchanged a nervous glance with the crew off camera, but no voice came through the earpiece. Keanu wasn't here to promote a movie or to entertain years ago. He started off with a steady, soft voice. "I received an invitation that didn't feel real." Keanu adjusted in his seat, the rosary still resting on the table in front of him. "Tell me what," the host asked in an attempt to regain control. The audience held their breath when a man knocked on my door one night at the hotel in Florence while I was filming a small personal European production. He didn't say his name, but instead handed me an envelope sealed with the Vatican's insignia. Inside, the audience saw an invitation, not official or diplomatic, written by Pope Francis himself, and the host raised his eyebrows in obvious surprise. Keanu stared off into space, seemingly reading the letter again in his mind. It read, "I would like to walk with you in silence among the olive trees." The host asked, barely above a whisper, "And you went?" Keanu nodded. "Of course I went. I thought maybe he knew something, or maybe he wanted to ask for institutional help, a donation or something like that. But I didn't know what I found." He paused, and a heavy silence filled the studio. The room was still. There were no cameras or the press, and the tone had changed into something near sacred, almost liturgical. Was cold. A man in his senior year was waiting for me in a garden under an old tree. Keanu stopped again and went on. The Pope appeared exhausted and thin, but his eyes were more alive than anything I've ever seen. The host remained silent and listened carefully, and the audience was completely enthralled. He immediately began speaking, claiming to have seen a video of me visiting a children's hospital. He claimed that silence spoke louder than any sermon, and then Keanu took a deep breath and admitted that he felt God had been silent with him for years. His words fell like stone in the studio, and the whole room froze. He talked about the weight of Peter's chair and the agony of standing in for something bigger than yourself while feeling completely alone. He claimed to have prayed, but the heavens felt silent. Keanu now turned to face the audience, and there was urgency in his eyes. "Await faith survives silence," he told me, "but I fear that one day it may start to imitate it." "What did you say?" the host. Keanu straightened and repeated the words exactly as they had been told to him. "If I don't see you again, this secret must live cliffhanger." The words rang out like an invisible bell. "Did you open the envelope that night?" he asked more subtly than ever. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Tension increasing, the presenter inquired. Keanu shook his head, saying, "No, I kept it for years, but now that he's gone, I don't know." The host sat frozen, barely breathing, and Keanu leaned forward, his eyes locked on the small golden rosary. "I kept the envelope hidden for years," he said, saying it traveled with me through every movie set and hotel room. "I never opened it, telling myself it wasn't my place. If I can remain silent any longer, the studio was so quiet that it seemed like time itself had stopped. Even the usual soft hum of stage equipment seemed to fade." He looked up, but when I heard he had passed away, something changed, and he slowly reached inside his jacket with the care of someone handling something. Sacred Keanu produced an envelope. Yellowed with age, its wax seal still intact, deep crimson stamped with the papal crest. When the host asked, "You're going to open it?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he held the envelope up to the cameras and broke the seal without saying a word. The sound was deliberate but quiet, and it felt louder than anything else at that moment. He unfolded the letter, his hands steady, and he started reading to the man of silence, who sees more than he speaks and listens more than he. "This world doesn't need more saints and gold," Keanu continued, as the audience leaned forward as if attracted by a magnet. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, not out of fear, but out of reverence. "I write this with a heart torn between duty and despair for years. I fought behind marble walls. I wore the crown of a fisherman while swimming in a sea of secrets." Keanu paused, swallowing hard. "There are forces inside this church. And now if my voice is silenced, I ask you, an outsider untouched by the politics of my world, to carry this truth not to destroy, but to preserve a beat. And at the end of the letter," Keanu said, looking up from the page, there was something else. He unfolded a second sheet, his eyes narrowing slightly, and his voice dropped. "That I could never cleanse them. They wear crosses on their chests, but move like wolves. I tried to expose them, but I failed." Nearly to a whisper, the audience whispered, "It was a vision, a prophecy." And the host leaned forward. The Pope wrote. Keanu took a breath and wrote, "The one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile, he will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void." The host blinked in shock, thinking that Keanu had slowly stated that the collapse of faith would not come from heresy, but from imitation from someone who appeared pure but brought nothingness, complete silence. And then Keanu added, "But after that letter, everything changed." "What do you mean?" the host asked, and Keanu met his gaze. I began studying in silence, faith power, and without speaking to anyone because I wanted to understand what he meant. Then people began to arrive, and Keanu looked straight into the camera. I received anonymous letters warning me not to reveal anything I knew, and they were all connected to him. Keanu held the second sheet from the envelope with the weight of. It was much heavier than the paper itself, so he looked up again, looked around the studio, and then turned slightly toward the audience. This is the first time I've ever read aloud, and nobody, not even the crew behind the camera, stood still. As he read, "The one who will undo me shall not come from within. He will smile, he will dress as a friend, but he will carry the void." A murmur swept through the studio like wind through dry leaves, and the host sat. The host broke the silence, and Keanu nodded slowly, telling me, "The world's faith is no longer crumbling from truth. It's because someone outside the church would rise not as an enemy, but as a mirror empty. And this person would gain power through charm by imitation of goodness and then hollow everything out from the inside." Even so, as if afraid that even a breath might break the spell, Keanu folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table next to the rosary. The host appeared uneasy and shifted in his seat, possibly hoping the producer would switch to commercial, but there was no signal and no one dared to interrupt. He added that Keanu went on to say that the church might not take its next big step, itself. The words hung in the air, unnerving and prophetic. You mean someone else would carry forward its mission? Keanu didn't respond right away, instead turning back to the rosary. He felt faith had to change, he said, but he was afraid would be manipulated before it could. The audience fell silent. No one coughed, no one moved. It wasn't just curiosity, but a sense of shared gravity. A sense that something irrevocable was being spoken aloud. The host attempted to change the tone once more, saying, "You're talking about big ideas here. Keanu theology, power prophecy. Maybe we should take a breath." However, Keanu's voice cut through the air. Not loudly, but finally, this isn't a story, it's a warning. And beyond that, the host leaned back, uncertain of what to say. Relentlessly, I didn't talk about it, or even tell my closest friends when. I got home after that meeting in the Vatican. However, a year later, I got a letter with no return address or signature. He reached into a folder next to him and unfolded a piece of paper that was older than the one from the Vatican, but it wasn't as old. He read it and said, "Do not open the envelope. There are forces watching. You are surrounded. You are not. Staying in the shadows, silence protects more than you think." The host leaned forward once more, tension rising. And that's what's threatening Keanu. He put down the letter and continued the deaths of reformist priests, journalists who disappeared while looking into Vatican finances, marginal notes found. In old Bibles in locked archives, patterns, warnings, the host opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, nodded. That was the first of 6 letters I received over the next 4 years, all from different places and in different handwriting, but they all cautioned me not to share what I knew. Did you think they were from inside the church at first? The host whispered. You think the Pope trusted them? Keanu shook his head. No, he feared them, but he knew they might be necessary because he knew the church as it was. The words, which were actually written in Latin but repeated across several documents, sent a ripple through the audience. No one knew what they meant, but somehow it felt dangerous. Without a name, Keanu explained, it's not an organization, not a group, it's a belief, a quiet hidden network formed by those who no longer trust the church but still believe in God. The host stared at Keanu, and I realized that the Pope hadn't picked me by chance. His eyes darkened, not out of fear but out of memory, and he saw something in me that I hadn't noticed until the dream. Keanu's eyes lingered on the audience for a moment longer before he leaned forward and picked up a different sheet of paper from the folder, this one more recent but worn, and the host remained silent, sensing that the room had entered territory. Beyond performance, this came a few weeks before the Pope passed away, Keanu said quietly. There was no sender, just a folded note that had been slipped under my hotel room door. He held it up, reading it, and there was no official seal or signature, just a typewritten message on yellowing paper. If you open the envelope, there will be consequences. Silence protects more than you know. The audience was stirred. The host blinked hard, and I could see that he was shaken. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but then the letters kept coming, all urgent, and they all said the same thing. The host asked Keanu, "In different ways, stay quiet. Did you ever try to find out who sent them?" He nodded. "I tried private investigators. Contacts in Europe, but nothing. No fingerprints, no CCTV footage. Whoever sent these knew what they were doing." He took out a thin folder and opened it, and inside were newspaper clippings, scribbled notes, and photographs. He placed a few of them on the table, and at first I thought I was imagining connections because paranoia causes you to see patterns where none exist. But then he picked up a picture of a youthful, smiling priest, Father Matteo, who oversaw youth, programs in Palermo, and was vocal about corruption in church finances, vanished while traveling to Rome. Another Italian journalist who was looking into real estate connections between the Vatican and shadow companies in South America was found, dead in the Tiber River. They declared it a suicide, but she had just published an exposé 2 days prior. The host was clearly upset, but Keanu persisted, and I discovered notes concealed inside old Bibles that weren't on the internet, cataloged, sometimes in Latin, sometimes in symbols, and he slid one of them across the table on it. It had a crude drawing of an eye with 3 words underneath it that were nomen vivid without a name. Keanu translated these words repeatedly in texts on the margins, always buried deep inside forgotten copies of Scripture. The host reached for his glass of water, but he didn't drink, and the audience was completely still. Then Keanu said, "I realized something even more disturbing," pausing his voice low. "The Pope didn't just see me. He saw someone who moves in. Silence, someone the world doesn't expect you to carry something sacred." He closed the folder and turned to face the host, who picked me even though I'm not a member of the church. The host was silently taking everything in, and he inquired carefully, "But why you?" With memory-clouded eyes, Keanu leaned back and asked, "What happened after the dream?" "Yeah, the night I opened the envelope, I had a dream, or maybe it was something more," Keanu said, slowly nodding while the host furrowed his brow in the manner you described. He looked into the audience again. I was in a massive abandoned basilica. Everything was covered in dust, no candles, no prayers, just silence. A shiver passed through the audience, and at the altar Keanu said he was there, Pope Francis standing waiting. And he spoke, the host whispered. "What did he say?" "You thought you were just an actor," Keanu remarked, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them. "But I saw the man who carried silence with dignity," he said, and the audience appeared to exhale as one. I woke up and Keanu said, "I've never felt anything like this since that night." He was shaking and sweating, and the host stared at him. "Do you think he knew he was going to die?" Keanu didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I'm afraid of dying for nothing," he said, because the weight of the words crushed the air. Keanu turned back to the table slowly and deliberately, and he took something else out of the folder, which is why tonight's live stream Keanu Reeves was no longer just a guest. He was a vessel for something deeper. He took a deep breath and started. The dream, which wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced before. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt like the kind of silence that hums in your chest dust. "I'm going to show you something that was never meant to be seen." A slow hush rolled through the studio. The host didn't speak, and the audience didn't move. He paused, his voice steady but soft, at the altar where he was waiting for Pope Francis. He wasn't sick like before. He was calm and almost glowing, and the host leaned in, drawn in. What did he say? Keanu looked out toward the audience as if addressing each person individually. You thought you would only play a man of conviction, but you were always more. You carry silence like a mantle. You carry it with dignity, he said, looking toward the audience. I don't know what to believe, Keanu admitted, but it changed me. Since then, I've stopped working as much and started reading scripture, theology, mysticism, even apocryphal texts, in an attempt to understand what he wanted me to do. He paused and told me that the church was drowning in its own echo, that the voice of God had been buried beneath centuries of noise, that only someone who understands the value of silence could hear it again. The host swallowed hard. He began writing every night, and sometimes I feel like I'm not the one writing. The host was obviously shaken, and he paused before responding. Are you afraid? I thought for a while, but now I think maybe the fear was just the first test. He then turned back to the rosary on the table. The Pope told me something else in the dream, and just before it ended, the host waited. Your silence will be a door, he said, but you must decide if you'll let others walk through it or keep it locked forever. The host looked around, obviously overwhelmed. Keanu looked directly into the camera when the host asked why he was telling all of this on live television. He said, "Truth is quieter than lies, and if I don't say this now, I might never get another chance." He leaned back slightly, and the host hesitated because he had something he needed to show you. This is not what I expected when you sat down tonight. Keanu smiled for the first time in minutes, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was tired and worn. The host leaned in and asked, "What is it?" "It's dangerous, maybe," Keanu said, "but what scares me more is what happens if I don't show it." He reached into the folder again and pulled something little and rectangular from between the papers, his fingers shaking not from fear, but with the weight of inevitable fate. Keanu held it up, face down and still hidden, saying, "It's a picture of that night in the Vatican, a private moment filmed by someone else." The audience was completely still, and every breath felt like it was suspended in the room with the Pope in the garden. He turned the picture upside down, but there was something else in it. The host's voice cracked, and Keanu looked down at the picture. He put it on the table face up, but he didn't turn it toward the camera yet. This figure is in 3 other pictures I've gotten over the years, and it's always hidden and always watching. The host whispered, "Who is it?" Keanu looked up, and I don't know how long it was, but the Pope warned me in the dream that you'll see the shadow before you see the light, Keanu. Put a picture of me and the Pope on the table at an angle that only the host could see. Keanu said it was taken the night we walked in the garden, and I didn't know it existed until it came anonymously years later. He pointed to the corner, and when I looked closely behind the trees, I saw a hooded figure who was watching the host squint, uneasy, and could have been anyone. This same figure also appeared in 3 other pictures that were sent to me over the years, all in different locations and always away from the cameras. "You will see the shadow before you see the light," was the Pope's final statement to me. "It's not a threat," Keanu said, "but it's a warning that something is coming, and it won't be the church that faces it. It will be us." The host sat silent. He got up to go, saying, "Silence doesn't always indicate peace. Sometimes it signals the start of conflict. Faith isn't gone, it's just waiting." He looked back at the curtain, "And if I believe this is the end of everything, please wait, due to the fact that what followed and was worse